What's up, Card Chats members? This is Owen Gaines, aka QTip, coach over at DragtheBar.com. This is a video that is from my No Limit Hold'em Treasure Chest series over at DragtheBar, and it's a good example of some of the lesson style videos that I make over there. And I've just recently joined your community here, and I'm excited about all the posting that I see going on, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So I'll be sure to check the forums. If you have any questions or comments on this video, I'll be happy to answer them. So enjoy. The micro and small stakes are peppered with multi-tabling tags whose win rates are between break-even and 2 big blinds per 100. Some of these players show amazing discipline and their playing schedules to be getting over 100,000 hands in every month. I've often thought about how huge it would be for one of these players to improve their win rate by just a couple big blinds per 100. I've now coached over 25 students, and most of these players come to me with a marginal win rate of 2 big blinds per 100 or less, and are hoping to get to 6 or higher. I've been able to identify some of the most common areas I've found that will give them some of the quickest, most dramatic increases in their win rates. This video is going to focus on one of those areas. In his book, Elements of Poker, Tommy Angelo talks about the bread and butter spot of poker. Now, he gives this name to the situation where we're the pre-flop raiser and we're in position. And it truly is a powerful spot. Let's say it folds to you on the button, and now you have some options. You can limp, fold, or raise. And you can raise to different amounts. Now, most players say to never limp in this spot. And while I can think of some unique situations where I'd prefer to limp, it's one of the few poker mantras using an absolute term that I wouldn't mind giving my stamp of approval. Not only can you just take the blinds right there with a raise, which is a fine result, but it also allows you to get in that bread and butter spot. You gain the initiative in the hand, so your opponent's going to be responding to you. You're in position for the hand and can make better decisions than your opponent. You get all that with also having the benefit of being in a bloated pot. Now, a couple years ago, I did some research on how often the blinds would have to fight back in order to stop me from raising any 2 cards in late position. Incredibly, they had to put up a really large fuss in order to stop me from doing so. So I started to tweak some of the factors that determined the profitability of stealing with a huge range from late position. And interestingly, one of the main factors had nothing to do with my opponents. One of the biggest factors was all up to me. Would I take what was mine? And would I continue with my aggression and c-bet? Now, if I didn't c-bet often enough, the profitability of the steal went down quickly. It just makes sense, though, doesn't it? We invest extra money pre-flop to build the pot and gain the initiative. Our opponent plays right into our hands and calls out of position. We've taken out the bread, got it all buttered. Then the flop comes, he checks, everything's perfect. Then we just check behind, we give it all away. We lose the initiative in the hand, we're giving away equity to our opponent. We don't gain a chance to take the pot we built, we abandon the pot. Now, why would we do that? Well, one of the first things we learn as beginning No Limit Hold'em players is the concept of pot control. We need to protect our stack. We want big pots for big hands, small pots for small hands. We quickly learn not to escalate pots with marginal holdings. We have showdown value, so let's get to showdown and try to win the pot. Not only that, we've been told the game is a big bad game. We're after those monster pots. However, I found both these concepts to often get grossly misapplied, and it turns players into weak players who don't value winning smaller pots and also don't understand the value of an aggressive image. So let's get back to this hand. Folded us on the button, we have 5-6 offsuit. We decide to raise to $3, only the big blind calls. Flop comes down, ace, 2, 10, rainbow. Big blind checks. Now, most of my students will fire a c-bet here. They find the board to be favorable for a c-bet with the ace there, and their hand has little hope of winning without bluffing right now. And I think a c-bet is normally going to be a good idea as well. However, let's change the flop. Let's say the flop came down queen 10, 5 rainbow. Big blind checks, and now we have bottom pair, and suddenly many players totally change modes. They click into this pot control showdown mode, and they want to check. Only better hands are going to call, they say. I don't want to turn my made hand into a bluff. I can either snap off a bluff or on the turn if I check, and I also get a chance to try to improve to 2 pair of trips on the turn or river. Now, bottom pair has made them share this bread and butter spot. And I want to examine a few strategies here and see what makes sense. But before we crunch some numbers, I want to just point out a few simple pieces of poker logic with this change in thought process from air to bottom pair, determining whether or not we c-bet. First, let's look at the idea that only better hands will call. Now, first of all, how is this any different than when we held air? Only better hands we're going to call then too. Actually, when you hold bottom pair on this flop, some worse hands may indeed call, since there are a handful of straight draws that may be in your opponent's range. And secondly, let's look at this idea of pot control or small hands for small pots. Now, we're thinking about showdown with our bottom pair. And if we decide only better hands will call on the flop, well, that's not going to change much on the turn at all. If we don't improve to a stronger hand on the turn, giving our thinking on the flop, then there would also be little reason to bet the turn. And if we're going to check two streets, how much equity are we going to give away? Most of the villain's hands that we have beat on the flop will have about 25% equity, and with our checking line, we're handing the villain all of his equity in the pot, and we're doing so for free. Then there's the idea that we don't want to turn a made hand into a bluff. Now, when we do c-bet any calls, against most villains, we're going to have very poor equity. However, now our opponent is going to be responding to us because we keep the initiative. And if he check calls the flop and then checks the turn, now you can decide what you want to do. If you decide to check, you're the one who's getting equity for free. When you're behind on the flop, you'll normally have about 20% equity, and you get all that if he just calls and checks on the turn. When you c-bet on the flop and get called, that's not a straight bluff, it's a semi-bluff. And remember that one of the biggest factors to decide whether or not to semi-bluff is your equity. The greater your equity, the more often you can fire away, since he needs to fold less often. So why are we more willing to c-bet on the ace-10-2 flop, where our equity will normally be much lower than when we have bottom pair? Even if we had 0% equity on the flop, if we fired a half-pot bet, villain would need to fold 34% of the time in order for it to be more profitable than not betting, and we'd be better off than checking. However, when we have 20% equity, and we're likely to realize the whole amount, then we're only going to need to have him fold less than 9% of the time. And that's not even considering any implied odds if we improve. And he pays us off with, say, top pair on the river, or whatever the case may be. So when we have more equity with our bottom pair, we should be more inclined to fire semi-bluffs against his check calling range. And the final point I want to make here is that we're not appreciating the power of our fold equity. So when villain calls, yeah, sure, we're in bad shape, but fine. How often is he calling? Don't forget, there's a 6 big blind pot in the middle of the table that's trying to find an owner. But don't undervalue the winning these small pots. Now, I understand the check line has some merits and is often a plus EV strategy. I understand that check line often makes a hand even easier to play. I even understand that two strategies are not hugely different in their EV. But think about this. How often do you get into this situation? If you're playing 6 max, you'll have the button or the cutoff about 34 times in 100 hands. Now, how many of those 34 times does it fold to you? And we'll try to be conservative with these numbers, but let's say, half the time. So about 17 of these situations, it'll fold to you, where you're in late position, either the cutoff or the button, and it's folded to you. And let's say you raise it up, say, how about 12 times out of the 17? Now, how often does a blind call, and then you're going to be in position for the rest of the hand? Out of these 12 times, let's say maybe that happens half the time. So that would be 6 trials. Now, of that 6 trials, how often do we flop something marginal and then get checked to? Let's say that happens a third of the time. So that would be 2 trials in 100 hands. Now, what if I could show you the check line is inferior by, say, a half a big blind, or maybe even sometimes 1 big blind? Well, that's an extra half big blind or 1 big blind that you pick up every 100 hands, and that's going to happen 2 times, is what we just talked about. So that can be up to 2 big blinds more that you get in 100 hands by taking the superior strategy.